In the open doorway of an ancient, weathered log cabin far up the slopes of Jenkins Ridge stood an elderly man, gaunt of frame and unkempt of attire, Abe Cunningham, simply known in the little world of Coon Holler as Doc. Now, Doc was innocent of all book learning and devoid of any license to practice medicine in the state of North Carolina, but the Ailing Mountain Cove folk had sent for him and took his potions for the past 3 decades. Doc was putting his final touches of preparedness to his favorite and only surgical instrument, which he had lanced many a bowl horizon and had amputated sun-dry, crushed fingers and toes with no antiseptic, except for putting the luckless patient under the influence of his ponderous fist. That surgical instrument was nothing more or less than his trusty Barlow knife with a single blade tapered to a needle-like point. He was sharpening it carefully from a whetstone that was kept lubricated from the juice of the home-cured tobacco twist that he was chewing. Doc paused as James Cutshaw's canvas-top wagon lumbered up the rocky road and stopped in front of the gate. It seemed that everybody who passed Doc's gate would stop. "Howdy, Doc. How's it?" Cutshaw called from the seat underneath the wagon bow. "About as common as ever. Lighten your load and blow your horses and come sit a spell." "Can't I reckon. Just been down to Bobcat Cove to see the new sawmill. It's a big outfit. Double bandsaw and resaw. They'll be working 300 men in a month." "Yep, I reckon they'll be building a right smart settlement on Bobcat," Doc surmised. "Yeah, it's looking like a regular town already. It must be nigh 100 company houses, strung all up and down the holler. They've got a new schoolhouse and a passel of teachers, and even a company doctor." At the mere mention of the word doctor, Doc snorted with contempt. "Well, I bet he's some young dude that buys his clothes at the store, and he's got a sheepskin from a college, and don't know nothing except for what he's read in a book." "I reckon you're right, Doc. I seen him today. He's sure young and stylish looking." "Well," the old man replied with evident complacency, "I ain't no man to brag, but I learned doctrine from old Injuns, and I've followed it for 40 years. And I've got it figured out that the 3 best medicines that the good Lord ever made were put right here in these mountains." "What's the 3 medicines, Doc?" the admiring man inquired. "Why, they're turpentine, balsam oil, and corn liquor. The 3 will cure any sickness, but it takes knowing how to use them in the right way. And you see, that's where I've got the advantage over all these town doctors." "Right ye air, Doc," agreed the wagoner with warmth. "I don't want no book doctor a-dosing me or mine. Doctorin's a gift, I say. Them that's got it don't need no schooling, and them that ain't, schooling won't do 'em no good nohow." Having delivered this bit of native wisdom, he chucked his horses, and the old mountain man quickly disappeared around the bend in the road. Doc, however, despite his assumed air of complacent disdain, was inwardly disturbed. For 3 decades and more, he had set his face resolutely against the subtle encroachments of newfangled notions into the 17th century world of Coon Holler. Once, it had been the threat of the railroad that rumor said was about to penetrate the shut-in valley. Fortunately, that menace to tranquility had come no nearer than the forks of Bobcat Branch, some miles down the way, where the new sawmill was now coming. Later, there was the invasion of the automobile, and despite the best efforts to keep that chug-chug of a laboring car out of the mountains, nowadays you could hear it chugging through the mud and over the stones, startling the wild creatures of the far-flung forest. Doc had no use for them steam buggies, and little patience with those who insisted on riding in them. It had been the same with the telephone, the tractor, the new time schools, the changing modes of dress, and every insidious disguise under which the octopus of modernism sought to thrust its tentacles into Coon Holler. But this newest assault upon the citadel of all things as they used to be was the most sinister threat of all. It struck home at his own door. Why, the whole countryside had looked to him to set broken bones, to pull aching molars, and to relieve everything that ailed him. Now, however, in this new and populous mill village, he would have a formidable rival. He had heard enough about these educated doctors to know that they employed medicines and methods that were wholly foreign to his kin, and the scorn and the rage surged hot in the old hillsman's heart. "I'll show 'em, by golly, I'll show 'em," he muttered half aloud as he resumed sharpening his knife. Ordinarily, the deep, crushing roar of the 6 o'clock morning whistle at the big sawmill on Bobcat Branch would startle Miss Cornwell into an upright bolt as the sun climbed up Jenkins Ridge and was peeping down into the little white schoolhouse. This morning, however, she slowly dragged herself to the threshold of consciousness, only to get to the doorway with an unusual and unexpected sensation of pain and dizziness. It was strange, but it was real enough. Miss Cornwell, the first assistant to the brand new school at Bobcat, was just too sick to get up, and for almost the first time in her young life, too. Soon, the housekeeper at the teacher's cottage laid her large motherly hands on the teacher's throbbing temples. "No, Miss Cornwell, you can't teach no school today, and you ought to have a doctor." It took several minutes and a good deal of argument to get that through the young pretty woman's head, but she finally yielded to the housekeeper's insistence and consented to have the lumber company physician, the only regular doctor within 20 miles, called in to see her. The teacher dispatched a mountain boy to the mill to ask for Dr. Harrison, and within a few minutes the lad returned. "The new doc ain't there today. He's away up at Camp 6, where there's been a wreck and 3 men hurt. But I seen the old doc and I asked him to come, and he'll be here directly." "But who is this old doctor?" the teacher asked, who was still pretty much a stranger in the new lumber camp. "Why, it's old Doc Cunningham, ma'am," the housekeeper replied. "He's been our doctor here ever since I was a young gal." "Is he a competent physician?" "Law, yes, miss," the housekeeper assured her. "Everybody knows Doc, and most folks around here have more confidence in him than they do this young feller that the company hired." "Well, on your recommendation, I'll have him come," Miss Cornwell consented, being too miserable to argue much about anything. "Howdy do, miss. How you coming on?" The young teacher turned her aching head upon the pillow and looked back to the eyes of a tall, awkward man, dressed in a baggy suit of nondescript gray. He wore neither no tie or no collar, and his shaggy iron-gray hair was in need of both shears and a comb. But his eyes had a friendly twinkle, and his gruff voice was kindly. "Is this Dr. Cunningham?" the girl asked in surprise. "Well, it passes for him," the gruff voice replied with a good-natured drawl. The young teacher was puzzled by the rude attire and the ruder speech of the visitor. Doc continued, "Have you got a right smart of misery? Where do you hurt the worst?" She briefly detailed her symptoms. I think I must have a good deal of the temperature. Perhaps you should check it," she concluded. "Would you like a glass of water to rinse your thermometer, doctor?" If truth had been told, Doc had never seen a clinical thermometer in his life. "No, ma'am. I don't need nary a glass instrument to tell what's ailing a body. There's no necessity for a wagon load of tools, nor no drug full of foreign medicine to cure folks, if they got the right doctor. Now poke out your tongue." The patient, much too astonished for words, obeyed. The doctor scrutinized the poked-out tongue, uttering solemn at certain intervals. "Ain't been much keen for your victuals for a spell, eh?" "No, doctor. I haven't had an appetite for a day or two." "Well, let's count them pulse." The big, clumsy fingers closed upon the girl's wrist, while the doctor glazed at the dial of a small cabinet clock on the mantel. "You're right upset, missy. What have you been doing to get this away?" "Well, I've worked with the children to get them started off at school well, and I haven't had enough time for exercise." "Yep, them feisty young'uns will do that to you. It's a good thing you sent for me," the hillman went on. "I ain't no man to brag, but folks around here will tell you I'm a surefire expert at curing almost any kind of sickness. I'll fix you up a dose." As he reached into his weathered, worn saddlebags and he pulled out a flask containing a slightly amber liquid, he called to the housekeeper to bring a spoon. Pardon me, doctor, but what is that you're planning to give me?" the teacher inquired. She didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings, but she wasn't going to swallow just anything. "Well, it's something these town doctors know mighty little about," Doc replied with a pride that shone in his face. "It's the curin'est medicine that the good Lord ever made. It's balsam oil." "Balsam oil? Why, I've never heard of that before, at least as a medicine to be taken internally. Is it an antibiotic or an antiviral?" The man's expression was utterly blank for a moment, but he rallied heroically. "No, ma'am, it ain't nothing like that. It's just what I told you it was. It's the curin'est medicine for what's ailing you. Now here, swallow it down." Thanks, doctor, but I've never taken any medicine, except on the prescription of a regular practitioner. I was really expecting Dr. Harrison to see me. I think I'll just wait until he can come," the mountain doctor replied in a tone that was meant to be crushingly polite. "You don't have to take it if you don't choose to. But all I've got to say as these biggity town doctors, with their dude clothes and their fancy contraptions, they're killing a lot of people. Everywhere you go, they're dosing them up with poison pills. And this young whippersnapper sawmill doctor is going to do the same thing, and you're likely to wake up in your coffin. Good day to you. I done told you. And with that, the doctor strode out of the room. The next morning, Miss Cornwell was somewhat better, but the company doctor came to see her anyway. There he stood, trim and immaculate, as if his practice was in an exclusive residence of a big city instead of a straggling lumber mill in the mountains. In the course of his busy rounds, he had caught the occasional long-range glimpse of this young lady teacher, but not until now had he realized how beautiful she was. He laughed with her over the account of Old Man Doc's visit, but when he spoke, his tone was serious. "Unfortunately, we can't take this old man as merely a joke," he said. "He's causing me no end of annoyance and trouble. Many of the people in this cove swallow his worthless dope and his equally worthless advice wholesale. He stands in the way of every sanitary measure that I try to introduce, and he sneaks around the neighborhood, ridiculing me and substituting his balsam oil and corn whiskey for the drugs that I prescribe." "Then is his precious oil really worthless?" "Why, practically, yes. It might have some slight antiseptic value if it were clean. Otherwise, it has no medicinal quality to speak of." Before long, the young doctor left a prescription and a cheery farewell, and he took his leave. But it was clear that both the young teacher and doctor hoped to see each other once again, and the doctor resolved that he would pay some non-professional post-conference calls, and he did. However, the story of the indignity that Doc Cunningham had suffered at the hands of this foreign teacher lady had been retold up and down the hollers, and the story grew bigger and bigger each time it was told. One fella said, "I heard that this uppity foreign teacher woman just ordered Doc out of her house like a yeller dog, and she said she wouldn't let him doctor a hoss or a cow. Then she told him she was expecting that nice, smart, purty-looking young doctor, and she just knew that he'd cure her in a minute." So the gossip tongues had wagged, and even the mountain children, quick to echo in the word and act the tone of fireside chatter, were finding annoying little ways to express their hostility, ignored as she might try. Soon Miss Cornwell was fully aware that her social status in this narrow little world of lumber stacks and winding saws and pinbox shanty houses had suffered a change for the worse. As for the company doctor, he bore the heavier brunt of the old man's revenge. He had worked hard for weeks to introduce a few basic principles of sanitation in the camp. At his suggestion, the mill offices had furnished door and window screens for all the houses of the employees. However, many of them were just left around unused or converted into ash sifters or squirrel cages or chicken coops. Folks said, "Doc says it's just foolishness that flies make people sick. He says the Bible talks about flies, and it don't say nary a word about germs." Seems Doc Cunningham was making good on his promise to put the young company doctor through the ringer. Winter came early and was unusually severe. The top of Jenkins Ridge glistened with snowcaps almost continuously from Thanksgiving until late January. Soon after Christmas, the epidemic of influenza that was sweeping across the whole country made its way into the little shut-in world of Coon Holler. The mysterious plague was recognized at once by the young doctor. Scores of cases quickly developed, and there were frequent complications and a few deaths. The big sawmill was operating with a bare third of the employees. The school was closed, and the schoolhouse was converted into an emergency hospital. The company officials wired for more cots and supplies. All of the school teachers were now volunteering as nurses, taking temperatures, recording symptoms, and administering the doctor's medicines according to his instructions. Dr. Harrison was going day and night. Many trips he made out on foot, all the way out into the nooks, over the gloomy hills where no car, not even a horse or a buggy could go. Over the lonely trails he struggled by lantern light to find some lost cabin where a stricken family of perhaps a dozen was left to the crude nursing of a half-grown boy or girl. Yet, time after time, when the young doctor entered some lowly room where life grappled with death, He found that the old mountain doc had been there before him, administering his oil and rotten liquor, and sowing seeds of distrust and hostility against the young doctor's scientific treatment. It was much the same at the improvised hospital, where Miss Cornwell was on duty 16 hours a day. The patients would complain, "I ain't used to these new ways, and I'm scared to take these mysterious-looking powders and such. I wish you would send for the old doc." More than once, a nurse would detect some suspicious odor around a bed, and a search would find a flask full of moonshine whiskey or a bottle of balsam. And behind it all was the cunning and unsleeping jealousy of the balsam oil mountain doc, Doc Cunningham. One dark evening, when the epidemic was at its peak, Dr. Harrison and Miss Cornwell were sitting in the office of the emergency hospital. The doctor was dog-tired after a hectic day, and he was looking over the nurses' charts and penciling in brief notes for the instructions of the night. There was a vigorous pounding at the front door, and a ragged mountain boy spoke with urgency. "Are you the company doctor?" "Well, yes, Sonny. What's on your mind?" "I'm Carl's Tucker, from up at the head of Coon Holler, right past the gap," he drawled. "Doc Cunningham wants you right now." "He wants me?" the doctor asked in surprise. "Oh, there must be some mistake." "I reckon not," the boy persisted. "Doc said he didn't know whether you'd come or not, but he was powerful set on having you." For an instant, the doctor was suspicious. "What's the matter, Sonny?" he queried again. "I can't understand why he should be wanting me." "Well, you see, Doc's favorite grandson, little Tommy, has got some sickness, and he's terrible bad off." "Isn't the old man attending him?" "Yeah, he's been doctoring for a week, but he's scared the little fella's gonna die on him. And that old man's just a plumb fool about him, and that's why he wants you to come. He says it's awful urgent." The young doctor's decision was made in a flash. "Well, Sonny, we have our hands full here, but if the old man really wants help, we'll come." Within minutes, the doctor's roadster roared and pounded through the night, up the steep, rocky roads that had been made for oxen and sleds. As he rounded a sharp turn near the gap, he saw the gaunt figure of the mountain doc standing in the road in front of his cabin. His excited gestures bespoke of his agitation, and the stark fear was written on every line of his haggard face. He began, before the young doctor could get out of the car. "My grandbaby's got a bad sickness. His pa and ma have done give up on him, and my treatment ain't working like it usually does. Now, of course, I reckon you know I've said some purty mean things about you, and let that pass, old man." The young doctor broke in. "Let's have a look at the boy." Then the mountain doc caught the sight of the young teacher who had stepped out of the car dressed as a nurse. He recognized her instantly as the patient who had refused his treatment and dismissed him in favor of his rival. He bristled up for a moment, but the fight was out of him now. There was nothing but the sense of utter helplessness in his face. "I'm proud you came, Missy. I need you both. I've done my best, and I don't know nary another thing to do. And I want you and the young doctor to fight as you've never fought before." The sick boy laid on a rough straw bed. His only covering was a much faded and soiled quilt. The room, with its doors and windows tightly closed, reeked of the blended odors of turpentine, balsam, and whiskey. The lad was in a stupor, and he had laid there for hours, except for every now and then when the grandfather would pick him up and pour more whiskey down his throat. He moaned at intervals, and his labored breathing could be heard even in the next room. Seated around the fireplace where the log fire threw its fitful glare into the room, huddled a dozen or more neighbors, sitting in stolid silence to see whether it was going to be life or death for the stricken boy. Near the bedside, the boy's mother, distraught with grief and fear, she rocked back and forth in her chair. "Oh, Lord, son, I can't bear to see you go. Oh, Lord, what will I do when you're gone?" The boy's father tried in vain to quiet his wife. Jenny, be quiet now. Maybe old Pappy and the young doctor will pull him through." Get everybody out of the room and open a window," was the doctor's first orders. He opened his medicine case, and he took the boy's temperature, timed his pulse and respirations, and he made a thorough stethoscopic examination of the chest. The grandfather remained by the bedside, watching every movement, scanning the young doctor's face by the light of the flickering kerosene lamp. "What ails him, doctor? It ain't like no sickness I've ever seed. It's a bad case of pneumonia," the doctor replied briefly. "Much congestion in both lungs, though more improvement is in the left. The temperature is typical, and the heart seems strong and steady. I would say the crisis of this case is now simply a matter of how good a fight the lad can put up. But we must give him every chance." "Well, don't you want to give him some more liquor, doctor? It's a cold night, and he ought to keep warm." "Not a drop," the doctor retorted loudly. "He's poisoned with alcohol already. Please understand, old man, if I'm to undertake this case, my orders are to be obeyed to the letter. And I'm not promising anything, mind you. But this boy has a chance, and I'm going to see that he gets it. But you have to help by doing what I say." All through the night, the doctor watching closely the change in symptoms as the sick boy in the darkness of delirium battled for both breath and life. The mountain doc sat with him, although he hadn't laid down or slept for 2 nights. He hung on every motion of the physician and the nurse. Once, long after midnight, they motioned him to remain on guard while they went outside to get a breath of fresh air. They stood together for some time on that little porch of the cabin. The crisp, moonless night was uncannily still. The lonely house on the mountainside seemed to stand on an island in a boundless ocean of darkness and nothingness. Only the soft stir of the wind in the spruce trees broke the utter silence. Suddenly, from far down in the valley below, came the faint baying of a hound at some distant neighbor's cabin. Instantly, 2 bear dogs stirred and emerged from beneath the porch and set up deep-throated answering howls. Before they could go back inside to see whether the patient had been aroused by the commotion, the door flung open, and the grandfather stood there cowering in fear. His face was made more ghastly by the yellow lamplight. "Oh my God, folks," he moaned. "That there's a sign. Them dogs howling that away. My grandson's gonna die. I've been looking for it all the time, and now it's certain." Almost fiercely, the young doctor motioned him to silence. "See here, old man. You've got too much sense to believe in signs like that. Let me show you some real signs." He took up the chart that the nurse had been keeping hourly throughout the night. "See here, the boy's temperature has been slowly subsiding, a whole degree lower now than it was at dark. His respiration is slower and easier, and his pulse is better. I think we can safely say that he's past the crisis." "I sure hope to God you're right," was the old man's response. But how can you tell so much by looking at that little glass tube with the numbers on it, and that rubber telephone of a thing that you listen through? I can't figure it out. There's so many unexplainable things that happen in these mountains that we've just lived here for so long, we can't help but just believing in the signs." Daylight came at last. After the night's vigil, it was clear that the boy had taken a definite turn for the better. "He's still very sick, of course," the doctor explained, "and he'll require the most careful nursing for several days. I'm leaving Miss Cornwell here for the present, and you must do as she directs." The grandfather stood watching the doctor as he gave the patient a final examination. The look on his face was one of wordless admiration, almost of awe. When the doctor rose to go, the crust of the old man's stoicism, which 60 years of mountain life had hardened into stone, broke like a shattered jar, and his pent-up emotion gushed forth like a flood. "Glory, hallelujah, doctor. You and that little lady has fought it out with death, and you've whooped the devil to a farewell. I know I ain't done neither one of you right in the past, but it's just because I'm an honorary mountain man, and I don't know no better. But from now on, if any man, woman, or young'un ever opens their head to say one word against you, I'll stand up for you. So help me God." The 3 of them walked down to the gate, and the old balsam doc awkwardly slipped a flash of his fragrant oil into the young doctor's hand. "You young folks must excuse an old fool like me, but I seen last night how things are between you'uns, how you look at one another, and I can tell you'uns are right smart of each other. Just take this here along. It ain't no count for pneumonia fever, but it sure is the curinous remedy for colic and croup of a baby, and I have a feeling you might be needing it pretty soon." And just like that, the mountain doc and the young city doctor finally had something they could agree on.